I was a park ranger at a national park. I will never forget this horrific night. It all started a few years ago. It was your run-of-the-mill, boring shift at the office. I worked the night shifts, and their staff was pretty small, so there was usually only one or two other rangers working with me. But on this specific night, I was alone. I yawned and looked at the clock. It read 3 a.m. Only a few hours to go. Suddenly, I heard a branch crack outside. Like the paranoid person I was, I instantly tensed up and began to slightly panic. "You're being crazy," I told myself. "It's just an animal or something." But my paranoia returned twice fold once I heard another branch breaking. I knew it was most likely nothing, but I got up and made sure the door was locked. And when I looked out the window, scanning for anything suspicious, I took a deep sigh of relief when the answer was affirmative. Upon sitting down, I swore I could hear the faintest of footsteps coming from outside the office. So faint that they could have been in the back of my mind. But then they grew louder, and there was no doubt that they were real. The footsteps got louder and closer by the second, but they didn't sound like any animal or human I knew. I tried to distract myself by playing some games on my computer, but the paranoia was becoming too much to ignore. I jumped when I heard the horrific sound of screeching nails on one of the back office windows. I got up and quickly made my way to the window, only to find a long, red scratch mark. My stomach threatened to empty itself at the sight. Usually I liked being alone at the night shift, but in this moment, I wish I had a coworker with me. I heard another scratching noise. This time it was coming from the window closest to my desk. I ran out of the room and watched as 5 terrifying nails slowly scratched their way down the window, leaving that same red mark. I spent the next half an hour sitting in my chair, shaking and teeming with anxiety, hearing the scratching sound every so often. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up. I looked at the first window. Totally and utterly covered with red scratch marks. There was no seeing out that window. I checked every other window, but it was the same for all of them. I sat back down and looked at the clock. It was 4 a.m. There was another hour until dawn. I can just wait for the morning shift to arrive. I should be okay. I knew I needed to make myself comfortable as possible in the situation. I went to each window and closed the curtains, then settled in my chair and tried to distract myself with some random news articles. It was really the only entertainment I could access on the work computers. I shot up in my seat when I heard a horrific scream coming not far from the office. I got out of my seat and made sure I had my firearm handy. I walked over to the front and I tried to look out the window, examining the area. The scream had sounded like someone in trouble or deeply fearful. I opened the door and embraced the chilly air before venturing into the outside world. I locked the door behind me and clicked on my flashlight, slowly scanning the surrounding area, but I found nothing. Is anyone out there? I called out. I was just met with the same horrific scream as my response, this time sounding much closer. The scream caused me to jump, and my nerves were on fire. Are you okay? I called out shakily. Help! I heard an uncanny voice shriek, sending me into a dazed panic. I continued to scan the area with my flashlight, desperately hoping to see what was making these screams. The hairs on my neck stood up when I felt this gut-wrenching sensation of being breathed upon. I turned around and aimed my flashlight behind me, illuminating the cruel imitation of a woman staring right at me. After the initial shock subsided, I booked it back to the ranger's office. I pulled out my set of keys and tried to find the one that would unlock the door, but it wasn't there. I turned around and was met with the scene of the skinwalker tauntly dangling the key I needed in front of me. Adrenaline surged through my veins. I ran to the side of the office and began relentlessly pounding on the glass window, but it just wouldn't break. I looked behind me and saw the skinwalker now a dozen paces closer. I let out a scream from pure fear and booked it into the forest, not caring where I was going. I only cared about putting as much distance between me and that horrific creature as possible. While running, I pulled out my cell phone and crashed. When I saw it had no service, I pulled out my radio and tried to call for backup, but I only got static. After running for a while, my body just gave out from the exhaustion. As I lay on the ground, pushing many deep lungfuls of oxygen I could into my lungs, I scanned the area, looking for any signs of that creature. Once, I locked eyes with the two eyes staring at me from behind a tree. Adrenaline took over and suddenly I could run again. I knew just how long the forest stretched. It would take me a long time to reach the end, and even when I did, it wasn't like anyone was there waiting to help me. Please, help me, the creature shrieked. Something about its voice was incredibly distressing and inhuman. I picked up my pace, not caring about how scratched up I'd be from the branches as I ran into them full force. And I tripped over a branch. I screamed in pain as my face impacted the ground. I scurried onto my feet and noticed my flashlight wasn't on. I couldn't see anything. I could only hear the footsteps getting closer and closer. I felt the flashlight and realized one of the batteries had fallen out during my fall. I bent down and felt the ground near me, desperately hoping to come across the battery for my most important sense, my sight. I decided to cut my losses and leave the flashlight when the footsteps had become too close to ignore. I was now briskly walking through the forest instead of running, my arms out in front of me to feel what was ahead of me. After a long time venturing in the forest, I finally made it out. I looked at the dimly moonlit river beneath me, feeling just the tiniest bit safer. That tiniest sense of safety I felt was ripped away from me once I heard the footsteps. I climbed down and began to run on the river's beach. My body kept threatening to collapse from the exhaustion, but I wouldn't let it. I looked behind me while I ran and could now see the creature in greater detail. It morphed into this uncanny woman, into a four-legged beast charging me on all fours. I searched my mind, trying to gather up all the information I knew about it. I had heard the legends of a skinwalker roaming this park, but I always thought it was just a nonsense fairy tale. I remember that a way to kill a skinwalker was to state its true identity, but I had no idea what that was, and it fell very short. I had no clue what this creature's true identity was, and it's pretty clear I had no way of finding it in the near future. I looked up and got a small glimpse of hope when I saw the light of the sun slowly creeping above the mountains. I looked behind me and noticed the creature wasn't following me anymore. I took a sigh of relief and slowed down my pace, but I didn't dare stop running. I knew that the closest ranger's office was only an hour's walk away. I ran for a little while longer and then slowed to a brisk walk due to my exhaustion that I had put my body through. After a long and treacherous walk, I could see the other ranger's office in my sight. The sun had now fully risen. I made it to the ranger's office and attempted to catch my breath while banging on the door. I heard footsteps shuffle and come my way, and the door opened. Another park ranger stood there looking concerned. "Jeans, are you alright?" he asked. "There's something in the woods," I said between ragged breaths. "I know," the ranger calmly responded. "What?" I asked shakenly. "I said," the ranger started. I watched in complete horror as the ranger slowly morphed into the creature I was familiar with. But before he fully morphed, I took one last look at his badge and read his name, Hachi Siwax. "I know," the creature finished, its voice now heavily distorted. He instantly bolted to the river behind me and the creature followed. I didn't know if I could run much longer without passing out, and suddenly I realized the name on his badge would be a guess to his true identity, and decided to take the risk. I stopped in my tracks and turned around. "Apache Still X." The creature suddenly seemed startled, like it was going to retreat. "Apache Still X!" I screamed even louder, causing the creature to run away. I began to roar out in a maniacal laughter. I had won! Or so I thought. Out of nowhere, I heard this deafening sound of what sounded like thousands of gut-wrenching screams at once. I felt my ears as they throbbed in pain. I heard the sound of trees wrestling, and I turned to see the most panic-inducing scene of hundreds of skinwalkers and wendigos running out all directions of the forest, charging at me. I screamed and ran into the ranger's office, closing the door and locking it behind me. I sat in the chair and began to hyperventilate when the creature started relentlessly begging on all sides of the office. It seemed like there was no end near except the end of my life. Shit, shit, shit! I screamed in a frustrated and fearful tone. The skinwalkers and wendigos began to tear down pieces of the building one by one, causing me to slowly retreat into the center room until the building was almost entirely destroyed. The next few minutes were a horror-filled daze. The creatures were slowly removing the last pieces of the building, as if to taunt me. I swear I even heard a few of them snicker. I didn't know much about these legendary creatures, so I figured it would be a good idea to commit the most destructive act I could think of. Fire. As a park ranger, I had some decent experience of knowing how to make a fire with nothing but rock and steel. I began to search through what was left of the office. A pocket knife, oh so tantalizing, caught my eye. I ran for the pocket knife, but the creatures must have known what I was attempting. They jumped off and attacked me. It was pure agony. It literally felt like I'd been transported to hell. Each of those creatures mercilessly tortured me, but my brain blocked out the pain the best it could and focused on the one thing that mattered in that moment: creating a fire. I grabbed the pocket knife, flipped it open, rubbed a rock against it. I saw sparks forming, and my eyes widened with hope. I tried again and again until eventually one of those sparks caught wood and the fire began to slowly but surely envelop the building. The creature shrieked and retreated from the growing flame. So did I. Some of the creatures had already been caught in the fire and were too gone already. Only a handful survived, and they ran into the forest. I pressed my radio and explained that a fire had erupted and it was spreading fast. I ran down to the river thinking it would give me the best chance of protection from the fire. I jumped into the river and struggled immensely as the current tried to pull me into its wrath, but I swam and swam until I was on the other side. I collapsed on the ground and took in deep lungfuls of oxygen, feeling victorious but defeated at the same time. I looked back and saw my radio was floating down the heavy current. I cursed myself and got up, but I decided to cut my losses and move on. I needed to find the nearest ranger office to alert them of the fire before it got too bad. I walked into the forest and was instantly enveloped with paranoia. Felt like I was being watched with a million taunting eyes, waiting for me with pure rage after what I had done. I stopped in my tracks and looked around, examining every piece of tree, trying to ease my paranoia. And just as I was about to let my guard down, I saw two unblinking and menacing eyes staring directly at me from behind a tree. First I froze in fear and shock, but just as soon I was running for my life again, giving me a strong sense of that unpleasant deja vu. I didn't know much about this part of the park, but I assumed this forest didn't go on for that long. After hours of walking, I had proven my assumption incorrect. This forest seems to be going on forever. I can smell that nasty smell of smoke growing more pungent. Finally, Finally, I noticed the trees were becoming less close to each other, and before I knew it, I was out of the forest. Made it to the office and explained the fire situation to the officers. I didn't bother explaining the skinwalkers to them. I knew they would just think it was some insane nonsense. Anyway, I made it home safely, but I quit my job very shortly after that. Still have nightmares about those creatures to this day. Alright, dear listeners. That story was written by Sensitive Bull on r/scary stories. I hope you enjoyed listening today. And be sure to tune in next time for another amazing story. Sweet nightmares. And good night.